Hey everyone, it's Pastor Matt Jensen again, going over this week's sermon curriculum. This is the third part in a 3-week series that Jason did, then Alex did. Now Jason's wrapping it up, talking about generosity. So we talked about reaching outward, growing deeper, and making a difference. And the thrust of this message is mainly about tithing. He's going in it. But the underlying foundation is having a heart of generosity and joining God in his mission through our generosity. So let's just get into it. If you have a side window, you can pull up the sermon discussion guide or on your tablet or whatever it is, print it out, and we'll just go through this for the next few minutes. All right, so share your story. These two questions, again, are kind of the icebreakers of this thing. And the meaning and kind of the vision behind these two questions is to start us thinking of generosity and its impact. And so it's very much thinking about gifts that we've received that meant a lot to us when someone gave us something, and then what have you given to someone else, and it really meant a lot to them and you were generous. So what was that like? So those are those two questions to kind of warm up the generosity spirit within everyone as we get into it. Then we go into hear God's story. The first two questions there are the verses Jason references in his sermon. So we're going through those and saying, what does this tell us about God, what he values, his heart? And then the third question there is something that in my devotions, I went back to 2 Chronicles 29:10-18. And it directly relates to the widow's mite, the widow's offering that Jason is really using in this message. In that passage in the Old Testament, David is saying to everyone, look, I want to really build God's temple up, and so that more people can come to worship him, so he can get more glory, and so that we can really make an impact in this land. And so he asked the people, he said, I'm calling you to be generous, contribute to this building project. And they did. And what's really cool is David prays right after that success, and so we're going to be looking at that in this third question. But it's not that he's saying, look how much they gave, but man, they really gave with the right heart, and that's what really raises God high and what he honors. And so we're going to be looking at that in that third question. And then we come to the create a new story. And again, this is where the rubber hits the road. This is the action items of this lesson. The first one there is about outward action. The second question is about inward action. So what's one way you're going to be more generous this week? Second is what's one way you're going to tend to your heart this week to help prevent your generosity from becoming just another religious chore done with wrong motives. So again, throughout this whole thing, as we go through this study, we're not just doing this to play church or to do all the right things, especially with generosity and tithing. God's not really interested in how much we give and are doing so much as the heart behind it. And so even when we apply this thing to our lives throughout the rest of the week, we always ask, what are our motives? How is my heart? Am I doing this to really raise God high, or to kind of puff myself up? And so that's the spirit of that. Now, if we go into the going deeper section, it's a little bit longer this week for the fellow Bible nerds. And we're going to be looking at the text Mark 12:41-44, just those few verses that talks about the widow's offering. Jason mentions it in his sermon. We talked about a little bit of it in the first questions there. Now in the going deeper section, we're going to be looking at this from all different kinds of literary angles to really get the most out of it, but not just what the passage itself says, but what its context to the rest of Scripture, how it informs following passages and vice versa. So there's 3 little paragraphs there at the end. I just want to reiterate, for the purpose of this exercise, it'd be more helpful to have a physical Bible, as we'll be looking at the relationship of large swaths of Scripture to this particular passage. When we're looking at this, we're going to be comparing different texts, or what's around it, chapters, and what's before and after it. So it's just easier to have a physical Bible. So I'd recommend that for this exercise. And then with each question, the consider notes are there to help facilitate your own observation in each segment and aid group discussion. So I just wrote those to help kind of warm up where you're going with each question. So 5 questions here. The first about the narrator's point of view. What can we learn from this text as we take into account the narrator's point of view in this text? The second, what can we learn from this text as we take into account the setting in which it's located? And then third, what can we learn from this text as we analyze the character of the widow and those around her? So look at all the characters at play. Here we have the disciples, the rich people, the widow herself, Jesus, good luck judging him. And then you have the rhetorical techniques. What can we learn from this text as we evaluate the rhetoric and stories surrounding it? Can this story help inform our understanding of what's around it when we look at what's being verbally said, or vice versa? And so in the consider section, I have different literary techniques that is common, especially in Mark. Mark uses this. Usually he doesn't say just like, here's a collection of stories, it's kind of neat and clean. But sometimes what's around it informs the story that's around it. Sometimes he'll give two stories and put something in the middle, and what's in the middle can either explain the two stories around it or vice versa. And so Mark is very strategic, more so than the other gospel writers, with this literary technique of having the rhetorical techniques inform what's around each passage in its context. And then we get into the conflict and tension. What can we learn from this text as we evaluate the conflict and tensions represented in the story? Take a look at the pull between externalism of actions and the interior sentiments of the heart in the story, or self-proclamation and humble faith, and on and on. I got a few examples there. And so that's the going deeper section. You're not just going to be reading the text, but you're going to be analyzing it from all these 5 different points of view you may not be familiar with doing, but afterward you pan out and you say, oh my gosh, I have a deeper understanding of not just the text, but what's around it, Mark's intent with the passage, and then his larger narrative of the story of Jesus. And so the going deeper section is to kind of help us to pan out and see the larger picture. And then at the very back of the sermon curriculum, just a fun little thing, like a picture of the temple there, and then showing you where exactly the story took place of the widow giving her mite on one of the little offering things there. So that's it. Have fun with your group, and see you next week.